Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and never lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had any respect for people. And in that city there was a widow who kept coming to the judge saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent. Grant me justice against my opponent. Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while, the judge just refused to help her. But then he said to himself, "Though I neither fear God or have any respect for people, I will grant her justice, because she keeps bothering me. Why, if I don't help her, she will just wear me out." And Jesus said, "Listen to what this unjust judge says. And will God not grant justice to those who cry to him night and day? Will God delay long in helping them? Oh, surely God will grant justice to them. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" And then he told them a parable to those who trusted in themselves for their righteousness and viewed others, well, with contempt. He said, 2 men went into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now, the Pharisee, standing off by himself, prayed like this: "God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like that tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all I earn." But the tax collector, standing far away from everyone else, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And Jesus said, "It was this man and not the other who went to his home justified. Because everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted." The first question is, why put these parables together? Why not deal with one and then the other? Well, that question implies that these are standalone stories. Well, they do appear in our common lectionary like this, and if you look at most of our Bibles, they do come with their separate headings, just like this. Yet they don't appear in the original documents this way, which, by the way, were devoid of this numeric graffiti that helps us pick the text apart into isolated verses. But the stories do inform and interpret one another, which is typical of the parallelism in Luke, like the stories of Zechariah and Mary, of Simeon and Anna, and so on. We can read them separately, but they do help interpret one another when taken together. First, we have the parable of the unjust judge and the persistent widow. Now, at the outset, we're told by Jesus that he tells us to them for their need to pray always and never to lose heart. Pretty simple, really. In fact, why bother tell the story at all? Maybe there's more to it. And by the way, who is the them that's being referred to here? Well, if we look back in the narrative, we find that it's a collection of Pharisees and Jesus' own disciples, a collection of unsympathetic and sympathetic listeners. As we come to the first parable, we hear some verbal threads. The first comes by Jesus and then confirmed by the judge himself that he neither fears God nor respects people. We're let in on his character, which isn't so nice, and yet Jesus says, pay attention to what he says. Now, this doesn't mean that what the widow says is unimportant. I mean, she is articulating the prayers of the people. I took the liberty of emphasizing it by repeating it. Now, at the end of this story, Jesus says, if this unjust judge responds justly, how much more will God to those who cry to him? But it doesn't end there, but with his statement that when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Wait, I thought this parable was about persistence in prayer. Well, I guess faithful people pray, but I don't think you would have to tell a Pharisee this. Maybe we ought to listen more. And now we come to the other parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Now, the verbal thread here is around the word standing. I mean, the term Pharisee means to be set apart, and he is literally standing off by himself. Now, there is a tendency to want to overplay the Pharisee in our telling, to make him as comically arrogant as that unjust judge, like this. Oh God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like that tax collector. I don't think that's necessary because the Pharisee's own words and actions betray him when he compares his own piety to those obvious sinners. Have you ever known anyone to try to build themselves up by putting others down? You know, I don't think there's a way to do it without coming across as a pious ass. And I think that Jesus is hoping his own listeners, both disciples and Pharisees, find the humor in that. And then on top of this, the Pharisee's own bragging is undercut by his own boastfulness. For instance, he says, I fast twice a week, which was more than what was expected. But then he says, I give 1/10 of all I earn to the offering, which is what was expected. And then there's the tax collector who is standing far off away from everyone else. He can't even look to heaven, but beats his breast and says, oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus concludes that it's his humility before God that sends him home justified. Wait, there's that justified word, or justice, which sends us back to the first parable. I guess Jesus is challenging us with our need for justice, and if not humility, particularly in our praying. These are parallel stories. Each have an arrogant character and a character who is hurting. Now, in the first, sometimes we think that the judge corresponds to God, but we would never say that the Pharisee represents God. So perhaps we need to rethink who the judge is, particularly in light of the discussion about justice and faith. You know, it's been said that whenever we find humor in a situation, it's because we identify with it and laugh at our common humanity. Well, I think Jesus is portraying the judge and the Pharisee so comically. He's hoping his audience will see that potential in themselves. If both Pharisees and disciples find humor in the situation, they'll focus on their commonness rather than their differences. Jesus is encouraging justice and humility through prayer more than I think he's trying to alienate the Pharisees. And I think this is what Luke is shooting for and what we need to focus in on in this parable.